Oh, hello, listeners. My heart is so full. I am recording this intro after my amazing conversation with the guest interview I have on the show today. And I am so excited for you to listen in. Who is on the show? She is a repeat guest. She is the amazing Brenda Stephens. She brings a wealth of knowledge and compassion to narcissism and how to recover from narcissistic abuse. Brenda Stephens, MS, LPCC, is a group practice owner in San Diego, California, where she and her colleagues provide individual and group therapy to those who have been impacted by relationship with a narcissist. Brenda uses a thorough understanding of PTSD, complex PTSD, EMDR, and parts work to help clients understand and recover from the lasting complications of being in a relationship with a narcissist. She provides training to other therapists to expand their knowledge and understanding of narcissistic abuse, which is uniquely insidious and cruel. Yes. Brenda helps clients heal from the abuse they have endured and teaches them how to love themselves, reclaim their identity, and create healthy relationships. This conversation was magical. We really did a lot of great, not only like explaining why those of us who have been in these relationships might feel the way we do. We also gave tactical tools that both of us use that help us to reprogram and get out of this for ourselves and for generations to come. I cannot wait for you to listen in. And then please go shine some love on Brenda and she has an Amazon book and a workbook, and maybe just send her a message, just telling her how much you appreciate this, what's about to come. So let me just get into it. Let's go. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. I am so excited. I have done a lot of past episodes, including our past interview, talking and teaching about how to spot a narcissist and what to do when you're in a narcissistic relationship. And I will link those in the show notes below for listeners. But today we have Brenda Stephens on the show, who is here to help us focus in on how to heal from these relationships. And you helped me so much in this past interview. Your work continues to help me now. And that is something that, yes, we want to spot when we're in the relationship. We want to use the tools when we're in the relationship. And then also, like, how now that luckily I am so grateful to not be in these narcissistic relationships, how now do I best support myself in the recovery and my nervous system, really?
Oh,
so
yes.
I am so excited you came on. Thank you.
Thank you.
And can you speak just to a bit about that, about how sort of, if we've been in this sort of relationship with a parent and or a spouse, how do you see this showing up as adults?
For adults, probably some young, we don't work with kids at my practice. I don't really see it there, but I can tell you even teenagers, with parents who are, have some narcissistic traits or some other unhealthy traits, it lives in our bodies. And I could spend 4 hours talking about this. So I will try to condense. Typically what I see in my practice with the folks that I work with is people will come because they're in a relationship with a narcissist. And as we start doing the work of kind of untangling what happened, how they got involved, oftentimes they'll recognize that perhaps a caregiver or a parent, more than likely a parent, had some narcissistic traits as well. So by the time they're in adulthood and they're coming for therapy, what we absolutely see is a nervous system that is absolutely dysregulated. And that, I feel like I just dove into the deep end of the pool without talking about what all of that means. But one thing I commonly talk about is the fact that I don't know that I've ever had one client come to see me for narcissistic abuse that hasn't had some sort of digestive issue, like IBS or some something going on with the digestive issue. And as science is progressing, we're seeing that mind gut connection is so much stronger than we ever realized it was even 10 years ago. So all of that negative, harsh behavior and terrible treatment that we're receiving from a narcissistic person is affecting us. It's going through our brain, going right to our gut, and our gut is just in turmoil, trying to process everything. Our bodies get nervous. our heartbeat fluctuates. I mean, it's just a myriad of
Mhm.
things, and I could go into great detail, but what we know is that we're on guard.
Mhm.
We have this amygdala in our brain that's like the firearm that's going on, a fire alarm going off, telling
Mhm.
us that we're in danger. And especially if you've been raised by a narcissist, that amygdala is going off all the time, warning you that you're in danger, and your body goes into fight or flight,
Mm.
um, fawn, freeze, any of the things,
All
collapse.
of
A lot of
them.
us, yes, all of the above. And this is so common for folks. And I think, sorry, I'm just going on and on right
No,
off the
I'm
bat,
loving
but
this. I'm like,
okay.
yes, yes.
A lot of folks also you can't stay in fight or flight very long. You have this window of tolerance where we want to stay
Mhm.
most of our waking moments, where we can kind of tolerate the ups and downs that go out along throughout the day within that window. But sometimes things amp us up and we go above that window where we're kind of in hypo arousal or hypervigilance, even looking out for danger, which a lot of narcissistic abuse survivors are constantly, but we can't stay there. Our body just isn't equipped to stay in that hyper state for very long. And then we crash and we
Mm.
go under the window of tolerance, which is hypoarousal. And we are kind of collapsing. We're in freeze state. We really sometimes can't even function. And I
Mhm.
think one of the bad things about that, it's a natural thing for our bodies and brains to do. But I think one of the things is that we'll beat ourselves up for not being able to get up and handle things or do the dishes or whatever it is, that
Mhm.
task that needs to be attended to. So what's going on outside of just the words that are going back and forth, or the silent treatment, or whatever else is going on, what's going on inside of us is so complicated and so active that
Mhm.
it does a number on us. And that is, of course, there's grief and pain and all of that stuff, but
Mhm.
it's the having our bodies, our nervous system recover from this relationship that I think is utmost important.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
yes, and thank you. Like that is exactly my experience, that there was a level of ease after getting out of the relationship and setting up boundaries, because I went through a divorce, so I got out of that relationship, and then I also set some really strong boundaries with my biological parents. And so it was like I sort of had this narcissism cleanse, and I felt an initial sense of ease, and because I was no longer that fish swimming in that dirty fish water. I was like,
yes.
oh wow, this feels good, and did all my work and all of that. And then what I just started to notice, and what brought me to your work and really getting into this second phase, is that even though these people aren't in my life, my nervous system was still reacting as if they were. And I love that you brought up window of tolerance, because that was something I think maybe 4 years ago on my birthday, that was like my goal for the year. I was like, I am widening my window of tolerance. And my
I
kids were
love
like,
it.
what are you talking about? Like, are you opening a window? I was like, no, just, it's like,
Figuratively.
yeah, my
Yeah.
window of tolerance was like so like narrow.
Yes.
And I guess just to give sort of like, you know, real person talk to what that is, it's like my ability to feel comfortable, or to not feel anxious or like heavy in my chest. That's the window of tolerance, when you're just sort of like, oh, okay, everything's fine here. It's that was so narrow that I would then
Yes.
go into that um hypo. And so thank you very much. I guess, can you give some specific examples of when we're going into the hyper or the hypo? Like for me, I know I definitely went more hyper than the hypo, but still it's
Yeah.
yes.
Well, and there's something to be said about that too. I think when we talk about the vagus nerve, which I know is a hot topic right now,
Yeah.
but it's important to understand it because it goes throughout our entire body and it touches all of our organs. It's really running the show for our nervous system. Um, so the whole thing is activated. But some of the examples that I think people notice is, I mean, I love this one, is that you don't
Mhm.
realize it, there's sometimes a meme that will go around that says, okay, unclench your jaw and put your
Mhm.
shoulders down. And I'm like, oh yeah, how did you know?
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's those little things that we don't even realize we're doing. Our jaw is really tight. We're tight in our shoulders. We're holding our thighs together tightly. Our
Mm.
hips take the toll of that, and the hips
I
hold a lot
clench
of.
forward, almost like
Yep,
protective. Yeah. Hmm.
exactly. I had a client tell me once that she felt like she woke up with scream face. And I was like, what is scream face?
Oh,
But it's just this, this anticipation that
yeah.
something horrible is going to happen. And it just feels like you're screaming and you're not.
Mhm.
But there are all of these things that are happening with our bodies that we're probably not used to paying attention to because we're so much paying attention to what's going on outside of us because we're
Mhm.
waiting for danger or the next blow up or
Yeah.
upheaval to happen. So
On
a lot
edge.
of those things, yeah. Shallow breathing is a big one,
Mhm.
and what am I trying to say? A faster heartbeat. We
Mhm.
may catch that. I think with the smartwatches and the rings and things like that are helping us pay closer attention to that.
Mhm.
And then the big one is sleep. Um,
Mm.
Sleep is huge. I cannot say how huge it is, and I feel terrible for people who it just seems like an insurmountable
Mm.
um, thing to overcome, and it's not. It just takes baby steps to get
Mhm.
there. And that's kind of true with all of this, is that we have to be incorporating tiny little
Mhm.
things every day to get that window
A
broadened
little
and not
wider.
have, yeah, exactly, and not be in
Right.
that hypo arousal as
Well,
much.
and I thank you. And that's where a lot of your work has helped me to just have this awareness. Because I think some of this is just sort of, I know some of it can be in our society, just how we're trained as women to be, because most of my listeners identify as women. And it's just like how we're trained to be the good girl and like
Oh,
do
yeah.
everything for everyone. And so we're sort of on that hyper aware, vigilant state of like, if everyone's happy. But then the narcissist abuse brings it to another level
Yes.
of, turning up the volume there. And what I have been very grateful to learn is just that awareness again. So yes, some of that clenching of my jaw, my shoulders crunching forward. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
this is that. Other things that show up for me in hyper awareness is I will over talk. Like if there
Ah,
is space, I just like fill it because I get incredibly over like defensive. Like, let me just explain because I was like, I would get in such trouble if I never knew, like, if was it okay? I
yep.
was just thinking back to something when I was younger that my dad, like it was not okay in that house to be still. Idleness was not okay. And so
Oh, yeah.
sometimes it's like, oh, dad's home. Okay, grab a rake. Like we lived in New England and it's like, grab a rake, start raking. And I remember one time I was raking and then he started, he wasn't a big yeller, but in his way, it felt like yelling to me. Like I was doing the wrong thing. I should be sweeping the driveway this season. I'm
Oh,
ruining and so it's just this hyper like, oh my God, okay, let me explain, dad. Let me explain why I'm sweeping. And
mhm.
that still comes up for me. I was what, 8 or 10, and here I
Oh,
am
yeah.
53, still in this like, like maybe my husband is like, dinner tonight will be at 6, and I come up at 6:05, and I just notice myself, I'll be hyper, like overly defensive. Okay, let me just explain. And then, and he's just like, oh
Yeah.
my God, sweetheart, you're safe here. Like,
Oh, I love that.
right. Like this is okay. But so I notice it in that over defensiveness. I notice
Mhm.
it when I am over explaining. Maybe someone hasn't even said something, but I'm like, I'm sort of going, I don't know, maybe you have a term for this. I go to the past to explain why I'm speaking. Like I'll say, like,
Oh,
I'm telling this, like something will come up and I'm like, oh, well, I just heard that this, and I'll go back and give way more details than are needed. Like, well, it
mhm.
was this Lewis Howes podcast on September 12th, and I was listening to that because I was on a walk and it was okay. Like it's still that defensiveness, but
Yes.
it's a whole lot of talking that
Yeah.
so maybe listeners can relate.
I bet they can. I bet any of us who have been in narcissistic relationships can relate to this. And
Mhm.
especially as children, having to justify everything that you're doing and
Mhm.
having the bar consistently changed for you as to what is expected, like what
Mhm.
you just described, rake versus sweeping. How would you know at 8 years
You
old? Like
don't.
you're just
Mm-mm.
trying to be busy to stay in favor,
Mhm.
right? And our bodies absolutely hold on to this. And I think as we get into adulthood, this part never goes away. And if we want to
Mhm.
talk about parts work too, these parts come up for us from young ages. And our body feels like we're in that same situation where we're being judged or criticized or we feel like we're doing something wrong. And we react from what tool worked for us then,
Mhm.
right? Because we still received the same kind of abuse and that worked for us. At least we thought it did, or
Right.
maybe lessened it to some degree. But I think too, we've also had to defend everything about ourselves. I
Mhm.
don't know about you, but I've been doubted. I've been told that I'm not very smart. I've been told that I'm doing pretty much everything wrong.
Mhm.
So it's always like the coming with receipts, right? That's what the young folks say today. But
Mhm.
you know, you're saying, well, no, I read this here, or I remember hearing that there, or you know, you feel like you have to really have some backup for what you're saying, despite the fact that you're knowledgeable and you don't need to prove what you're saying. But it's just so, it's
But you
so
feel like you do. Yeah.
you
And
do
that's one of the things
exactly.
I heard you say is that like in these narcissistic relationships, you really are taught to question your own authority
Yes,
and to defer to their authority. They're the ones who know.
absolutely.
It's sort of that outside in limit. Like I have to like, is it okay if I rake according to my dad? Is it okay if I buy this shirt according to my husband? Is it
Oh
okay if I
yeah,
and then I'm left or I have been left and I'm working at this like no sense of who I am. Like, and so then it's just
exactly.
this like, well, if they think I'm okay, then I'm okay
Oh
type
my
this.
gosh.
Mhm.
Yeah, that touches on something so profound. And I don't have the words for it. I need to think of how to describe this concisely. But that there is this sense of not knowing who you are for sure.
Mhm.
Like we need to rebuild our identity
Mhm.
after we get out of these relationships or build it for the first time. If you
Right.
were raised by a narcissist, you probably still
Mm-mm.
have had no real sense of identity. But the other piece is this permission that you kind of just talked about. I still do it. Like, would my mom like this? Would my ex like this? Like, should I buy that couch? Wait, what's everybody else that I've ever met in my life going to think about this couch that I'm buying, right?
Mhm.
And we really do. We don't trust ourselves
Mhm.
to make these decisions because we don't really know who we are. And it's so crucially important to be as selfish as you possibly can to learn
Mhm.
who you are,
Mhm.
which is a hard sell for narcissistic abuse survivors because then they worry they're being like their narcissist. And I'm here
Mhm.
to tell
Yeah.
you, you are not. Yes,
You are not.
absolutely not. It is long overdue. And people who haven't experienced what we've experienced do this all the time. They think about what they want to do, or what color they like, what food they like, and these
Mhm.
are things that we're like, wait, I have to really, if somebody asked me what my favorite something was, I'd really probably have to think about it before,
Yeah.
until I healed and started to pay attention to that stuff, a process that I'm absolutely still in.
Well, I remember it, like at some point after the divorce and then I started dating, someone asked me what my favorite flower was. And I was
Mm.
like I totally went to first, like, first of all, my dad was like against cut flowers. So like my first brain was like, I can't like flowers. And then I was
Oh,
like, oh, well, my husband always got me roses and I hate it, but like, so I was like, and I'm like, no, and it was just this like, wait, what do I like? And I'm allowed to like what I like. And
absolutely.
that's why I just want to mention to all the listeners that you have this amazing workbook and you actually highlight this in chapter 4 of the importance of self-love,
Yes.
self-worth, self-esteem, because that really has been what, certainly if you had a narcissistic parent, that's what was eroded.
Yeah.
And then a narcissistic spouse, it continues that abuse. Why
Right.
do you think it's important to build this self-worth, self-esteem, self-trust
Be-
muscle?
because you will never live your life authentically until you do. And what a waste that would be to have people not be truly who they are and give that to the world and give that to themselves.
Mhm.
I think it is one of the biggest tragedies that people can experience is just to, I just not live their lives in a way that feels good to them or at least
Mhm.
tolerable, right?
Right. Or
Yeah,
yeah, not I really I mean that is heavy, but it is true. Like
it is.
it's the opposite of selfish. So the word selfish, I'm like, did a narcissist make up that word? Like, what are we even talking about with people? Most people, unless they are really over in that narcissistic spectrum, like selfish is just what they're, using as like the societal weapon to keep them in line and be the good girl. And, versus this understanding that like, Brenda and Susie and Jody and Laura and all the people listening, like we're all unique here with
Yes.
unique desires and wants for a reason. And if we're all just going to fall in line and be like little, so-and-so robots that maybe did the raking when they were supposed to do the raking, and, like we're like holding back from society. That's sort of,
Exactly.
right.
Exactly. I mean, imagine, I mean, what people are not offering that they do have
Mm,
the ability or talent within them that it's being squashed by
yeah.
this. It's really it's very sad.
Yeah. It's
It
super
really is.
sad. And so I do think like, so we're, sort of looking at some of the patterns of behavior that come out when you're in a narcissistic relationship. And also, I want to get back to the hypo, but also looking at ways out and really doing some of this work to
Mhm.
to lean into loving yourself, to lean into just even your thoughts around the word selfish, to lean into just getting to know yourself. AI is a big thing now, and I had a client recently ask ChatGPT. I just said, like stay in, like put the prompt in there that like says, ask me 20 questions to get to know myself better. And so ChatGPT was asking, and she just, but also for her to need to answer them. Like, what is it I do like to do? What is it I do? What is my favorite color? What is, and am I
Uh-huh.
saying that because that was safe in my house? Or am I saying that because like, holy wow, that actually is something I want to do.
Yes.
So
That's genius.
yeah,
That is
I'm like,
genius.
let's go for it. Let's learn, use them to help us.
Yeah.
But some of the hypo awareness, the behaviors of the sort of going the other way. One, I've definitely like just the sort of like not doing anything, like
Yeah.
not maybe excessive, who's defining excessive, but I was thinking napping or like
Hmm.
shutting down, or what are some things that you see on that
Well, I think
spectrum?
that is often the on the farther end of the shutdown, like the just full on collapse where you just kind of go pull the covers over your head and
Mm-hmm.
say, done for today. But there are little things, and there's a term called functional freeze that I think a lot of us operate
Mm.
in, where we're able to somehow show up and do the work at our job, feed the kids, do all of this stuff, but we're not experiencing the moment. We're not in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Something in here is going, it's either shut down, which is not completely shut down, obviously, because we're still
Right.
functioning, but the functional freeze is that we're going through the motions, but we're not really experiencing our life.
You're not like in the
We're
moment.
kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, we're keeping the guard up, or we're rumination is a big thing for us, right? So, or we're
Mm-hmm.
replaying an event that happened with a narcissistic person, um, criticizing ourselves for something we said that, oh gosh, if I would have said it differently, and why did I say it?
Mm.
All of the self-criticism. We're often staying in that place in our mind while we're just kind of going through the motions of our life. And
Mm.
again, that's not really living
Right. I
authentically.
think that'll really resonate with a lot of people. That's sort of like, it's almost like you're watching yourself from above. It's very robotic,
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
and then what I'm also hearing from you is that hypo would be the spinning in our thoughts. Like, so maybe not with the narcissist anymore, but maybe spinning in your head, like, did I say the right thing to
Oh
that
yeah.
woman at the book club? Or like, how did I,
Exactly.
right. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah, we're just shutting down, and that self-evaluation is pretty harsh. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure listeners can relate to that too, but we can be our own worst critic because it's what we've heard. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of language that someone else told us that we believed, and now we're telling ourselves the same thing. But yeah, when we're shutting down, we can often go to dark places and dark messages about ourselves to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a good place to be, but a lot of this too just counts as dissociation, as a term I'm sure most people have heard by now. But that dissociation, when you say where you're kind of looking above and sort of doing this robotic motion, that is a form of dissociation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of us stay in that mode too. And the collapse and the shutdown and the hypoarousal all could probably be classified under the term
Mm-hmm.
dissociation. They just look different in different ways. But it really is just the disconnection. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So hard. I'm also thinking like talking yourself out of doing things. Like maybe something
Mm.
comes up where it's like, oh, I might like, and then we talk ourselves out of it. We're sort of staying safe. Yeah, there's a lot. So so I just need to highlight to listeners, really one of the first steps is this awareness of sort of like turning,
Yes.
the lens on ourselves and being like, oh, where does in a kind way, like, where am I doing this? Where am I sort of I call it like verbally vomiting on people,
I see that too.
or yeah, or like
Yeah.
where is my head spinning on that, like, this
Hmm.
the overly spinning, the awareness step. But what else would you say, like if listeners were like, oh my gosh, help me, what are ways for them to start with this healing?
It's such little things, and I always hesitate to say self-care because it's so trendy to
Hmm.
say, but It really is self-care. It is giving yourself, maybe even just half of what you're giving to somebody else constantly, which I think is probably relevant to a lot of folks. But it doesn't mean like a spa day or a retreat or, I mean, those would be great, but
Right.
it's little things. Can I show you something? really
Yes,
quick?
please. Yeah.
Okay. This is a dry brush.
Oh,
I
yeah.
got this on Amazon, and I think my therapist recommended it to me. And it helps with lymphatic drainage, but it also helps with self-care. So you put this,
Mm,
it's bristly, and it's got these little rubber pieces in here, but I think this is a really good way to start. Something like this, or
hmm.
those tools you use to, just kind of, I can't think of what they're called, but you use them on your
Roll your
face.
face or so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those things, little things like that, even little vagus nerve stimulation. You have tons of nerves in your face. And I wanted to go back to something you said, safety, at least twice now that I
Oh
heard
my
you
God.
say.
Yeah.
That is crucially important too, to get
Mhm.
our nervous system to feel safe most of the time.
Mhm.
Keeps us in the window of tolerance. And there's
Mhm.
so many things that we can do that are little. And it really is this self-havening thing where you're just kind of
Mhm.
this and this. Actually, I don't know what the names for these things are, but
Havening, I think, yeah, you're just sort of like rubbing your arms or like
yep,
skin on skin
skin.
contact, or I'll put
Yep,
my hand on my heart. Yeah.
absolutely. And bare hand to bare chest. If you can, like
Mm.
just something like this, you can do this anywhere. You know, doing these things, reminding yourself to do these things is probably the first step, because we're
Hmm.
not used to taking the time to sit still enough
Hmm.
to do even just a little of this,
Yeah.
this. We do not give ourselves time to do that. We have to give ourselves permission. I'm going to take 3 minutes to do
Hmm.
this, and you'll be surprised at how much better you feel after doing something so
Hmm.
little. And hopefully that builds on itself, and you get
Hmm.
that snowball effect of this. But things like
Oh, yeah. I
getting in
don't
the
want to skip
bare,
over that because that's what I sort of, back to what we were talking about in the beginning, is that I sort of got out of like the circumstances of my life looked different, but my nervous system would still feel the same. And what you're
yes,
speaking to is this reprogramming of the nervous system. I
absolutely.
call it like it's the safety word again. I will say to myself, like, you need to signal safety. Like I'm trying to get my nervous system more comfortable with peace and ease and healthy
Yes.
relationships than it was, for 4 decades in this other hypervigilance, really like, oh my
Mhm.
God, I'm like the other shoe might drop type place. And I
Oh
do that by
gosh, yeah,
doing what I'm calling like signaling safety to my body, and those
absolutely.
touchings. You said 3 minutes. I feel like it can be like 3 seconds of
Yeah,
just like
anywhere.
and I just don't want the listeners to think like, oh no, that won't work, because it
Yeah.
really is like just rubbing my arms. It seems so silly, but just rubbing your hands back and forth, like your body in a primal place is relaxing. I also
Yes.
just a forward fold is something someone told me somewhere.
Yep.
And that, because really, like our body, when we're used to being in this like hype, fight or flight at all times,
Mm-hmm.
we are, thinking like our body's like a lion's chasing you, like you're very,
I
and
use
you
that example
can't
all the time.
forward fold. Like your body will not forward fold if you're being chased by a lion because
No,
you're running your butt off. But
no,
that's something, when I just hang it down, that takes 2 seconds for me. And I just
exactly.
shake it all out. And it's like,
Yeah. Oh, that shake is important too. I mean, all of these things that we can do just quick, like just even your
mm-hmm,
hands like that, little things that will bring you out, or especially if something's happening that's bringing you in and you
mm-hmm.
catch it, you can, disperse of that energy and hopefully maintain some kind of window of tolerance again.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
safety is crucially important. And I love what you said, forward fold. Like if people can do yoga or even just a couple of yoga moves, I am a
Mm-hmm.
big fan of that. The forward fold, even squatting stimulates
Mm-hmm.
deeper breathing, stimulates the vagus nerve, and puts us in that parasympathetic state, which is what keeps us in our window of tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
The safety piece is, I can't stress how important that is, though, noticing moments of safety. So your husband said that to you. What a
Yeah.
beautiful thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that just washed over you. And
Mm-hmm.
I want everyone to feel that, and when it happens, when they have those moments of safety, to sit with it and recognize what it feels like. Notice
Mm-hmm.
how your body's reacting. Like, do your muscles feel a little looser when you felt that
Mm-hmm.
safety. And we really need to pay close attention to those moments of safety and the moments of connection, which are usually tied together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think Stephen Porges's wife, he's inventor of the polyvagal theory. And I cannot remember his wife. I actually think her first name's Susan as well. But she did a study on oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. And she always says if you do a 20-second hug, you get this release of this oxytocin that will also bring your body into safety. So I always tell my clients, go hug somebody you love and trust. Just you feel anxious, go get that hug. You'll get that rush. You can do it with your pets. You know, it doesn't have
Yeah,
to
I
be
really appreciate that, because I know when I was going through my divorce, I didn't have anyone. I tried, like, friends were falling off the wayside,
that
but I
happens.
hugged myself. Like,
Yes.
and so it's like, yes, like go hug. Like if you have, now you're in a new relationship and you have someone that you can hug, for sure, a pet, awesome. And also yourself. Like there are all these, and I guess another thing I wanted to say is that, like, a lot of the things we're talking about is from a feeling place. Like we're trying to like signal to our body, like you actually are safe now, and rubbing our arms or forward folding or whatever. I also just want to open up that we can do it from a thinking place too. So when, like with my husband, if he hadn't said that, I often, and in my recovery, I have said to myself, like I notice myself, getting in that nervous state, and I will say to myself, this is different, Susie. You are safe here. This is just, or if people are not in a relationship and they're feeling triggered, like maybe they're at the restaurant and they're speaking up to a waiter because the waiter brought them, soda, and they asked for lemonade or something. And they're like, okay, I think I'm allowed to ask for what I want. And their nervous system is reacting. Like, I like, maybe in that moment, they're like, pushing their hands together or doing a little hand rub of self-soothe, but also in their head, to just remind your brain, this is different. This is not the narcissist. This is, I am allowed to do this. That helped me a lot, sort of attacking it from both fronts.
Yes, that's so important. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Because you really do. You have to give yourself reminders that I mean, sometimes I'll even with my clients say, look around the room. Notice the walls are different. This isn't your childhood home, or this isn't where you lived with your ex or whatever. So you're really in the present telling yourself, this is different. Like you said, I'm safe here. I'm the adult here.
I'm the
I
adult.
have this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've
It's
got
that, like, because in narcissistic relationships, it feels very, I'm totally blanking on the word that's the opposite of free. It feels very like you're very stuck and victim. And this other more, it's like, no, actually, I mean, even in my marriage now, I'm like, I could leave any day. Like I get to do what I want to do, and I get to say what I want to say, and I get to rake whatever freaking yard I want to rake. Like,
yes, excellent.
But it is a reminder of that, because I was not in that place. I mean, I think we said in the last time that I had this episode, like my ex-husband used to tell me what was okay to wear and what not. Like a neckline like I'm wearing, which is a little more low cut, would have been not okay. Like button down shirts were not okay. Like it was not allowed to wear makeup, and like all of this stuff. And now, I'm like, you can do whatever you want. I like, just come on. Like, this is a different place. And maybe your husband says like, wow, what'd you do with your eyeshadow today? Like, it's not the same thing.
He's just noticing.
Yeah. It's reminding ourselves of that freedom. And I know that at the time when my husband was telling me these things, I also had freedom. Like, I wasn't held down in chains in his house, but I didn't have the emotional safety. I didn't have the self-worth. I didn't have the thought in my, like, this is just what I thought, that this is what was modeled to me. And so this is what I thought relationships were like. That absolutely he gets to tell me. So there's a lot there.
Yeah. And that's tragic that's what we believe this is what relationships look like.
Yeah.
I heard somebody describe it as being a hostage, and that really resonated with me. I mean, clearly you're not literally a hostage, but it certainly can feel like it. And then there is no autonomy. There's always permission being asked for, or approval, at least waiting for approval to do whatever it is that you want to do or say or whatever. But you also said self-worth. And I think that is key. That is essential to the healing process too, because if we don't believe that we're worth being able to sit at the restaurant and exchange what we didn't order for something we did order, how are we going to heal? We have to really understand that we belong here. I have this quote and I always butcher it, and it's the most beautiful thing. And it's just a tiny line from a long poem, but it basically says something like, the trees and the stars and the cosmos, you belong here. And it just touched my soul the first time I read that. And I thought every person who's been in a narcissistic relationship needs to have that tattooed on their arm or something, so they can look at it. Because I think we feel like maybe we're taking up space that we don't deserve to take up. And we really need to change that narrative in our minds, and take up the space we deserve.
Yeah.
We do.
Right. Well, I think I would need something that, like, you're allowed to want what you want, and you're allowed to do what you want to do. That, like, sort of stepping back into that self-authority, not always other authority.
Absolutely.
Which, you've given a lot here, like a whole lot that we can all get started with, and ways to start really, the first step, noticing, and the second step is doing something different. So whether you're, doing the self-soothing and doing the different in your head, that's very helpful. I just want to take a second, because what's coming up for me, like, it really was validating for you to say the hostage. So thank you for sharing that, because I often, one of the things I do, I was in these relationships, I was an able-bodied human, and I stayed in the relationships for a long period of time. I'm like, what was going on? And it really, I have said before, it feels like I was in a cult of some sort,
Yes.
but that hostage is something that if someone is not in a narcissistic relationship, they don't get. They would look at, your or my experience and be like, just go out to brunch with the girlfriend. Like, what's your problem?
If only it were so easy.
Right. And if someone was in there, we get it. And I guess what comes up for me is some of the family dynamics that was modeled for us with a parent as a narcissist. Can you just speak a bit about, and I know this could be another 4-hour episode, but the family dynamic of the other parent being a sort of enabling parent, or reinforcing that message that.
Yes. Yeah. Oh man, do I want to write a book about this? I've done a few support groups about, I really, it's so crucially important, because I think one of the biggest betrayals that we realize when we're an adult is that that parent that we thought was the safe one wasn't.
Yeah.
Right. They were covering their own hide. They were, sometimes I put this in one of my books. I can't remember which one, or maybe both, but they'll often throw the kids under the bus to save themselves. Right. And we will grow up thinking, well, my dad wasn't as bad as my mom, or my mom wasn't as bad as my dad, or my mom was the safe one. Right. And when you get into adulthood, you realize your mom was in functional freeze or in collapse. And maybe that's the best that it gets. Often what happens is you've got two narcissistic personality types. There's one that acquiesces to the other most of the time, but they're in this dance that often excludes the children. They are so involved with one another and how they feed each other's egos that the children are forgotten, or just an afterthought, or punished for existing, right? Just punished for getting in the way and drawing the attention away from their dynamic to what the children need. And children need a lot. They need a lot of love, and they're not getting that in those relationships. This is another, I talk about grief in both my books, actually. I think grief is a process that we have to go through once we get to that point where we recognize what happened in our childhood, or in an important relationship that we had. We have to grieve something that's really complex, because we're grieving often something that never was. And when you shared a lot of dreams and hopes for the future with a partner, and then you realize that partner was never really in it, and he had a harem around him of women that were just in the, waiting to be chosen next. None of it was real. And it's so hard for us to wrap our brains around that. Make it be a parent that was the enabling parent. How does a child figure that out? And an adult child figure all of that out and come to terms with it? We have to grieve the process, which I know does not sound like fun, but
it's healing.
Honestly, it is. Yes, it is.
And I like what that looks like. for listeners, like the enabling parent, like how you said they throw them under the bus. Sometimes for sure it is like, well, if Susie had cleaned up her room, then, you wouldn't have been angry or whatever.
Yep.
But sometimes, and that definitely happened, that I was being held responsible for, dad's mood or whatever. But
Yeah.
also I found, and this is related to the self-worth and the like discomfort now of like, is it okay for me to speak up? One of the messages that was reinforced was just like, no, like your needs don't matter. Everything's led by the, narcissist in the house. And it's very much in that enabling, like, let's just, keep the water still, like, don't rock the boat.
Yes.
I just know that as I was coming out of this and doing healing, one of my grief questions I was having is like, why didn't, in this case, my mom stand up for me? Like, why didn't, like, she was noticing, and she sort of is like, she would say things like, I'm only married to him because of you kids. And like, and that sort of thing. And like, I'm doing this for you types.
Yeah.
And yet the self-worth there of like, why doesn't she speak? Like, why do I not matter enough?
Yeah.
That she would say something is something that I have heard echoed in my clients too. And then that's the self-worth, that we have to be like, the grief of like, no, that wonderful woman did not have the strength at the time to do that. That was, her own wounding and her own story, but you 100 frigging percent have the worth, and that it just wasn't modeled in your childhood.
Exactly. And, narcissistic abuse, I fully believe, is a generational trauma that's passed down, because the dynamics, they change up a little bit. Maybe one generation, there's an enabling parent, and in that family line, it switches back and forth, but it's absolutely a generational trauma. And, I used to think I'm going to break the chain. I'm not going to do that. I didn't. I had children with a narcissist. So big mistake there. Not a big mistake. I'm grateful for my kids, but my goal for my children is to stand up, to say what they want, know their importance, know their worth, know how much they're loved. That is the number one thing for me, because I think children who are raised with parents who are so involved with one another in an enabling and narcissistic relationship don't have the time to not only show love, but even let the children feel the emotion they're feeling. And they will often grow up not knowing.
Yeah, because we didn't have the window of tolerance to be like, oh, son upset. Oh my God, husband's going to get upset. Or like, I can't even handle it. Yeah,
exactly. Right. If mom is the enabler, her bandwidth is done. She has no room for handling anything out of being in survival mode in that relationship. Right. Yeah. So it's just a vicious cycle that goes on from generation to generation. And you don't just snap your fingers one generation and say, I'm going to fix it, which I thought maybe you could do.
Yeah. You can't. Well, I'm buying this, that like you are breaking generational patterns, because one of the main things that got me out of I was really like, I will stay married until, I had whatever X date on the thing. And I finally was like, what kind of marriage am I modeling? Like someone somewhere asked me, they're like, is this the marriage you want for your kids? And I have all sons. And I was like, oh, hell no. And so I just find, whether you get out and the kids are still in the house, or whether you get out and they're 62 and you're 82, it's like, we're modeling something different. Yeah. And then at any moment, like, I think we're also teaching, or we can be teaching them emotional resiliency. We can teach them that their emotions are safe, but we can be that safe place, even though we don't know what the other parent's doing, but being that safe place for them is a place. This is how I like to think about it, at least. But I'm like, okay, I'm the safe place. So I'm modeling something different for them, and they have a place to share their emotions, where I now am building my window of tolerance around them. Yeah. I also am modeling a different relationship with this husband, where there isn't the fear, and there isn't and different relationships with them. I'm not saying like, you better call me or I'll be upset, and so, maybe it's not the gargantuan leap that we wanted, to just cut the cord. Yes. But I like thinking that it's like, oh, hell no. Like, anything is a different model than
absolutely
what was modeled before. So it is these small steps. I'm going with the small.
Yeah. No, I could not agree more. I just thought you break the chain and then all of a sudden everything's rosy. Right. No, that's not how it happens. But you're right. Every little step that you take is in the right direction, and building that sense of safety for your children there's no better thing you can do with your life, I think, than to let them know that they have a safe space to land all the time.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
they're going to have trouble. That's going to cause the relationship with the other parent is going to cause some turmoil in their life, and it's going to pop up probably throughout their lives. But
Yeah.
knowing they have that safe space.
Yeah, here's a thought that I love thinking about my kids is I love thinking that they have the exact parents that they need to have to become the men they're gonna, mine are all boys, men they need to be. Because that for me has brought me a lot of strength in my grieving process that I have railroaded that thought into my head and that belief that I had the exact parents I needed to become the woman I am today. And I love that thought. That's very empowering. And for me to think that my kids have the exact dad they need to become these strong, resilient, emotionally empowered men that they're going to become fills me with hope. And then it keeps me focused on what I can control. And I get out of my,
yes,
that sort of piece. But I love also, this is sort of a full circle because part of why I wind you on is because there is this belief. It's like, oh, you get out of the narcissistic relationship and then you just cut the cord and everything's fine. And yet, humans, if only, right? Like we're like, where's the magic pill, Brenda? But it's like, okay, we've taken family drama out, but it's not. And yet it is, it is our work here now on Earth School to take these small steps. The next time your nervous system is feeling triggered, put your hand on your heart. Take a deep breath, rub your hands together, say in your head, you are safe, sweetheart. Like that to me, it's like I can feel the goosebumps in me. And we can do that for ourselves. So
we can. And it's a beautiful thing to do. I mean, that just touched my heart when you said that too. You feel it wash over you hearing somebody else. Imagine if you said it to yourself and believed it.
Yes. Right? Yes. Yeah. And that's really what we're here for. Right? Back to sort of that, like that is not selfish. That is us, really repairing those mother and father wounds. And I love it that child work. And so people are obviously going to want more Brenda. So tell my listeners a little about how to find you, how they can get these amazing resources Susie's talking about. And I will put all the links in the show notes.
So my website's probably the best place. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's stephensTherapy.com. It's Stephens with a PH. So it's STEPHENS therapy, all one word.com. And I have a lot of blog posts that will touch on some of the things that we've already talked about. So lots of reading material. Our podcast that we did before is on there and some other ones that I've done. So lots of resources. And most importantly, I hope we do a support group every other Thursday. Everyone around the world is invited if they can make it. It's an open group so people can come whenever it works for them. And the whole reason I started this group a few years ago was because nobody gets it like somebody who's lived it. And when you come to this group, you will be washed over with the understanding that you get there from everyone. When you say they looked at me like this and my whole day was ruined,
everyone's like,
everyone gets it. Everyone gets it because you know what's going to happen later, right? Whatever the stimulus is, I guess. But people in the group get it, and I want folks to have a place to be where they're heard and understood, and people aren't saying, well, that doesn't sound so bad, because it doesn't. Typically when you're telling your story, people who haven't lived this don't really
the big deal?
understand.
Just put on eyeyeliner, like
yes, exactly. Just wear the shirt he likes.
I know,
right?
Like come on. It's like
no, it means so much more than all of that.
Okay. Well, wonderful. I will put those links below. So listeners, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, just scroll down and it's like little purple, you'll see purple letters that will link to that. And I am so grateful for your time and just, sort of the short vision, what you're helping here in the Love Your Life show, but also big vision of what you're doing in the world. You are helping so many people, and it's like you throw one little drop in the water and it's rippling all over. So
I hope so.
You've impacted me, and we hadn't even met each other a year and a half ago. So I'm really so grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susie. I appreciate that.
Yay.